USS Texas, BB-35, a former United States Navy New York-class battleship, now proudly serves as a museum ship in Galveston. She was launched on May 18, 1912, and commissioned on March 12, 1914. After her launch, Texas operated in Mexican waters following the Tampico incident, though she saw no combat there. During World War I, she patrolled the North Sea but didn't engage the enemy, firing her guns only once at suspected submarines, which were likely just waves. From September 1927 to September 1931, she was the flagship of the United States fleet, one of only 4 ships to hold this honor between 1922 and 1941. In World War II, Texas played a crucial role, escorting convoys across the Atlantic and providing artillery support during the North African and Normandy landings. Later, she moved to the Pacific, supporting operations at Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Remarkably, she was the only Allied battleship involved in all 4 of these major amphibious assaults. Texas was decommissioned in 1948, after earning 5 battle stars for her World War II service. Texas was also a trailblazer in naval technology. She was the first U.S. battleship to mount anti-aircraft guns, use directors and range keepers for gunfire control, launch an aircraft, and be equipped with production radar. She was also the first battleship in the world to be equipped with 14-inch guns. In 1948, Texas became the first U.S. battleship to be turned into a permanent museum ship, initially located in Houston. By 1976, she was declared a U.S. National Historic Landmark, being the only surviving dreadnought from World War I and one of the few ships to have served in both World Wars. Today, Texas is managed by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, with daily operations overseen by the nonprofit Battleship Texas Foundation since August 2020. In August 2022, Texas was moved to a dry dock in Galveston for a $60 million repair project. As of March 2024, the repairs are still in progress, though she has been moved out of dry dock. Upon completion, her new permanent home will be in Galveston. Construction. In 1910, the United States Congress approved the construction of the USS Texas, making it the second Navy ship to bear the state's name. Newport News Shipbuilding won the bid to build the ship with an offer of $5,830,000, not including the cost of armor and armament. The contract was signed on December 17, 1910, and construction plans were delivered a week later. The keel was laid down on April 17, 1911, in Newport News, Virginia. USS Texas was launched on May 18, 1912, with Miss Claudia Leone, daughter of Colonel Cecil Leone, as the sponsor. She was officially commissioned on March 12, 1914, under the command of Captain Albert W. Grant. The USS Texas was armed with 10 14-inch Mark I guns, capable of firing 1,400-pound armor-piercing shells up to 13 miles. Her secondary armament included 21 5-inch guns. Additionally, she was equipped with 4 21-inch torpedo tubes and had torpedo rooms that stored 12 torpedoes and 12 naval defense mines. Notably, Texas and her sister ship New York were unique in storing and hoisting their 14-inch ammunition nose down in cast iron cups. Service history. In March 1914, USS Texas set sail from the Norfolk Navy Yard towards New York City, stopping overnight in Tompkinsville, New York, before reaching the New York Navy Yard on March 27. There, she spent 3 weeks installing fire control equipment. During this period, President Woodrow Wilson ordered part of the Atlantic Fleet to Mexican waters due to tensions caused by Mexican federal troops detaining an American gunboat crew at Tampico. Although the situation was quickly resolved, Rear Admiral Henry T. Mayo demanded an official disavowal and a 21-gun salute to the American flag. President Wilson saw this as an opportunity to apply pressure on the Herter regime, which he viewed as undemocratic. On April 20, he sought congressional approval and ordered Rear Admiral Frank Friday Fletcher to seize the customs house at Veracruz, an action carried out on April 21 to 22. Amid the escalating situation, Texas departed on May 13, heading directly into operational duty without the usual shakedown cruise. After a brief stop at Hampton Roads, she joined Rear Admiral Fletcher's forces off Veracruz on May 26, supporting American troops for over 2 months. On August 8, she left Veracruz, heading to Knight Bay, Cuba, before reaching New York on August 21. Texas stayed in New York until September 6, then returned to sea to join the Atlantic Fleet, maintaining a schedule of normal operations. In October, she was back on the Mexican coast and later became the station ship at Tuxpan until November 4, when she sailed to Galveston, Texas. On November 7, Texas Governor Oscar Colquitt presented the ship's silver service to Captain Grant, a gift funded by the Young Men's Business League of Waco, Texas. Texas then sailed to Tampico on November 14, followed by Veracruz, where she remained for a month. She left Mexico on December 20, setting a course for New York, arriving on December 28 for repairs that lasted until February 16, 1915. On May 25, Texas, along with battleships South Carolina, Louisiana, and Michigan, rescued 230 passengers from the Holland America Line passenger ship Rindam, which had been rammed by the Norwegian fruit steamer Joseph J. Cuneo. In gratitude, Holland America Line presented Texas with a model of a 17th-century warship, displayed in the wardroom. In 1916, Texas became the first U.S. battleship to mount anti-aircraft guns, adding two 3-inch/50 caliber guns atop the boat cranes. She also became the first to use directors and rangefinders for gunfire control, early predecessors of modern computer systems. World War I. In 1916, the USS Texas became the first U.S. battleship to mount a 3/50 caliber anti-aircraft gun on a platform atop a boat crane, marking a significant technological advancement. After rejoining the fleet, Texas alternated between training operations along the New England coast and the Virginia Capes, and winter tactical and gunnery drills in the West Indies. This routine continued for over 2 years until the U.S. entered World War I in April 1917 due to the unrestricted submarine warfare crisis. On April 6, 1917, Texas was anchored at the mouth of the York River with other Atlantic Fleet battleships. She stayed in the Virginia Capes Hampton Roads area until mid-August, conducting exercises and training naval armed guard gun crews for merchant ships. One notable incident involved a gun crew trained aboard Texas, assigned to the merchant vessel Mongolia. On April 19, 1917, they fired the first American shots of World War I at a surface German U-boat, averting an attack on Mongolia. In August, Texas steamed to New York for repairs, arriving at Base 10 on August 19, then entering the New York Navy Yard. After completing repairs on September 26, she set out for Port Jefferson. On September 27, she ran aground on Block Island due to navigational errors by Captain Victor Blue and his navigator. After 3 days of unsuccessful efforts to lighten the ship, tugs helped her back to sea. The incident caused significant hull damage, necessitating further repairs and delaying her departure with Battleship Division 9 for the British Isles in November. During this time, the secondary battery was reduced to 18 5-inch guns. Captain Blue, a protege of Navy Secretary Josephus Daniels, was not court-martialed. The navigator was held responsible for the accident. By December, repairs were complete, and Texas moved south for military simulations. In January 1918, she returned to New York to prepare for a transatlantic voyage, including reducing her secondary battery to 16 guns. She departed New York on January 30, 1918, arriving at Scapa Flow in the Orkney Islands off Scotland on February 11. Texas joined the 6th Battle Squadron of Britain's Grand Fleet, focusing on convoy missions and occasional reinforcements for the British Blockade Squadron in the North Sea. After arriving at Scapa Flow, Texas joined the Grand Fleet to support the 4th Battle Squadron in the North Sea, returning the next day. On March 8, she set out on a convoy escort mission, returning on March 13. Texas and her division entered the Firth of Forth on April 12, leaving on April 17 for another convoy mission. They returned on April 20. 4 days later, they supported the 2nd Battle Squadron when the German High Seas Fleet threatened an Allied convoy near the Norwegian coast. The Germans returned to their base on April 25, with Texas and the Grand Fleet following suit the next day. In May, Texas saw little action in the Firth of Forth. On June 9, she moved back to Scapa Flow, and from June 30 to July 2, she escorted American mine layers for the North Sea Mine Barrage. After returning to Scapa Flow, Texas participated in 2 days of tactical exercises and war games with the Grand Fleet, concluding on July 8. For the rest of World War I, Texas and Division 9 operated as the 6th Battle Squadron with the Grand Fleet, maintaining a routine schedule due to the German fleet being confined to their bases. This continued until the armistice ended hostilities on November 11, 1918. On November 21, Texas joined the Grand Fleet to meet the surrendering German fleet, later moving to Portland Harbor, England, on December 4. Interwar period. After the war ended, USS Texas set out on December 12, 1918, with Battleship Divisions 9 and 6 to meet President Woodrow Wilson aboard the George Washington, heading to the Paris Peace Conference. They rendezvoused around 7:30 the next morning and escorted the President into Brest, France, arriving by 12:30 in the afternoon. On December 14, Texas and the other battleships left Brest and returned to the United States, arriving off Ambrose Light Station on Christmas Day and entering New York the following day. Early in 1919, following an overhaul, Texas resumed her duties with the Atlantic Fleet. On March 10, she made history as the first American battleship to launch an airplane when Lieutenant Commander Edward O. McDonnell flew a Sopwith Camel off her deck at Guantanamo Bay. Later that year, under Captain Nathan C. Twining, naval aircraft were used to spot the fall of shells during a main battery exercise, significantly improving accuracy. This success led the Navy to equip all battleships and newer cruisers with floatplanes. In May 1919, Texas assisted the Navy Curtiss NC flying boat NC-4 in its historic transatlantic flight. On July 26, 1919, Texas joined the newly formed Pacific Fleet, spending the next 5.5 years in the Pacific. On July 17, 1920, she was designated BB-35 under the Navy's new hull classification system. On January 16, 1924, Texas left the Pacific and returned to the East Coast for overhaul and a training cruise to Europe with Naval Academy midshipmen. While in the Atlantic, she sank the incomplete battleship Washington on November 25, 1924, as part of the Naval Arms Limitation Treaty. Later that year, she joined the scouting fleet for maneuvers. On July 31, 1925, Texas entered Norfolk Navy Yard for a major modernization overhaul, which included replacing her cage masts with tripod masts, switching to oil-fired boilers, adding anti-torpedo bulges, and upgrading her fire control equipment. This overhaul was completed on November 23, 1926. Her anti-aircraft armament was increased, and the torpedo tubes were removed. Following this, she was designated the flagship of the United States Fleet and operated along the eastern seaboard. In late 1927, Texas briefly served in the Pacific. In 1927, Texas showcased the first talking pictures for crew entertainment. She returned to the Atlantic at the end of the year. In January 1928, she transported President Calvin Coolidge to Havana, Cuba, for the Pan American Conference, then continued through the Panama Canal to Hawaii for fleet maneuvers. Texas returned to New York in early 1929 for her annual overhaul and completed it by March. She then undertook another brief Pacific tour, returning to the Atlantic in June to resume duties with the scouting fleet. In April 1930, Texas escorted Leviathan into New York with the returning U.S. delegation from the London Naval Conference. In January 1931, she left New York for San Diego and Los Angeles, where she became homeported for the next 6 years and 3 months. She temporarily returned to the Atlantic from April to October 1934. During this time in the Pacific, she served as the flagship for the entire fleet and later for Battleship Division 1. In the summer of 1937, Texas was reassigned to the East Coast as the flagship of the Training Detachment, United States Fleet. By late 1938, she became the flagship of the newly organized Atlantic Squadron. Her focus was on training missions, midshipman cruises, naval reserve drills, and training Fleet Marine Force members. In 1937, 8 1.1-inch AA guns were added. In December 1938, Texas tested the first shipborne radar designed by RCA for the U.S. Navy, and in 1941, she was one of 14 ships to receive the RCA XAM-1 radar. World War II. Early operations. When war erupted in Europe in September 1939, USS Texas began patrolling the Western Hemisphere as part of the Neutrality Patrol, aiming to keep the conflict away from American shores. As the United States gradually moved to support the Allies, Texas started convoying ships carrying Lend-Lease supplies to the United Kingdom. In February 1941, the 1st Marine Division was activated aboard Texas. On February 1, Admiral Ernest J. King raised his flag as Commander-in-Chief of the reformed Atlantic Fleet on Texas. That same year, while on neutrality patrol, the ship was unsuccessfully stalked by the German submarine U-203. On December 7, 1941, the day of the Pearl Harbor attack, Texas was at Casco Bay, Maine, resting after 3 months of watch duty at Naval Station Argentia in Newfoundland. After 10 days in Casco Bay, she returned to Argentia and stayed there until late January 1942, when she set out to escort a convoy to England. After safely delivering her charges, Texas patrolled the waters near Iceland until March, then returned home. Throughout 1942, the ship underwent several modifications. Her secondary battery was reduced to 6 5-inch guns, and her light anti-aircraft armament was increased. Initially, 2 extra 1.1-inch quad mounts were added, but by June 1943, they were replaced with 10 quad-mount 40mm Bofors. Additionally, 14 20mm Oerlikon cannons were installed, and this number increased to 44 by 1944 in response to the Pearl Harbor attack. For the next 6 months, Texas continued her convoy escort missions to various destinations. On one mission, she escorted Marines bound for Guadalcanal as far as Panama. On another, she screened service troops heading to Freetown, Sierra Leone, on Africa's west coast. More frequently, she made trips to and from the United Kingdom, escorting both cargo and troop-carrying ships. Operation Torch. On October 23, 1942, USS Texas embarked on her first significant combat mission as part of Task Group 34.8, the Northern Attack Group for Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. The group's objective was Port Lyautey in French Morocco. Arriving off the assault beaches near the village of Maidia early on November 8, the crew began preparing for the invasion. Texas broadcast Lieutenant General Dwight D. Eisenhower's Voice of Freedom message, urging the French not to resist the Allied landings. Initially, Texas did not support the troops with gunfire. At that time, the concept of amphibious warfare was still developing, and many Army officers did not see the value of pre-landing bombardments. They hoped to achieve surprise with the landings. It wasn't until early afternoon that Texas was called into action to target a Vichy French ammunition dump near Port Lyautey. She conducted one more gunfire mission on November 10 before a ceasefire was declared on November 11. During this operation, Texas fired 273 rounds of 14-inch shells and 6 rounds of 5-inch shells. Some crew members went ashore to help salvage sunken ships in the harbor. Texas was one of only 3 U.S. battleships, along with Massachusetts and New York, to participate in Operation Torch. On November 16, Texas departed North Africa with a task force that included Savannah, Sangamon, Kennebec, 4 transports, and 7 destroyers, heading back to the east coast of the United States. Among those aboard Texas was a young news reporter, Walter Cronkite. He joined the ship in Norfolk, Virginia, and stayed through its operations off North Africa and the return journey to the U.S. On the way back, Cronkite was flown off Texas in one of her OS-2U Kingfisher aircraft when they were within flying distance of Norfolk. This allowed him to return ahead of a rival correspondent on the battleship Massachusetts and publish the first uncensored news reports about Operation Torch. Cronkite's experiences on Texas helped launch his career as a war correspondent. Operation Overlord. Throughout 1943, USS Texas continued her crucial role as a convoy escort. With New York as her home port, she made numerous transatlantic voyages to locations such as Casablanca, Gibraltar, and various ports in the United Kingdom. This routine of ensuring safe passage for Allied ships persisted into 1944. However, on April 22, 1944, her mission took a significant turn. At the end of one such convoy mission, Texas arrived at the Clyde estuary in Scotland. It was here that she began intensive training for one of the most critical operations of World War II, the invasion of Normandy, known as Operation Overlord. The training at Clyde involved rigorous exercises to prepare the crew for the complex amphibious assault. This period was crucial for honing the skills and strategies that would be needed for the monumental task ahead. Rehearsal. In preparation for Operation Overlord, USS Texas underwent extensive training and modifications. From March 15, 1943, she began a series of 14-inch gun firing exercises alongside British battleships HMS Ramillies and Rodney. These exercises included support from Royal Air Force airplanes acting as spotters. On April 29, Texas, along with Nevada and Arkansas, moved to Belfast Lough in Northern Ireland for final preparations. During this period, Texas removed her airplane catapult and OS-2U Kingfisher observation planes. The 3 Kingfisher pilots were temporarily transferred to a newly formed squadron, VO-7, composed of pilots from cruisers Augusta, Quincy, and Tuscaloosa, as well as battleships Arkansas, Nevada, and Texas. VO-7 trained in defensive fighter tactics, aerobatics, navigation, formation flying, and spotting procedures using Royal Air Force Spitfires due to the threat from German fighters. These pilots later played a crucial role in spotting missions for U.S. warships off Omaha and Utah beaches during D-Day. Additionally, Texas received new radio equipment, including a device to detect and jam radio-guided missiles. Final exercises were conducted in Dundrum Bay and Belfast Lough. On May 19, General Eisenhower visited Texas to address the crew, boosting their morale and readiness. By May 31, the ship was sealed, and the crew received a briefing on the upcoming invasion. For the invasion, Texas was designated as the bombardment force flagship for Omaha Beach within the Western Task Force. Her primary target area was the western half of Omaha Beach, supporting the U.S. 29th Infantry Division, the U.S. 2nd Ranger Battalion at Point du Hoc, and the U.S. 5th Ranger Battalion. The Omaha Beach bombardment force was divided into 2 sections. Texas and the British light cruiser HMS Glasgow were responsible for the western half, while Arkansas and the French light cruisers Georges Laigle and Montcalm covered the eastern half. Supporting this effort were American destroyers Frankfurt, McCook, Carmack, Doyle, Emmons, Baldwin, Harding, Satterley, Thompson, and British destroyers HMS Tennesside, Talabot, and Melbrake. Texas was one of only 3 U.S. battleships, alongside Arkansas and Nevada, to take part in Operation Neptune, the naval component of D-Day. On June 3 at 2:09 a.m., Texas and the rest of the Western Task Force departed Belfast Lock for Normandy. Sailing in parallel with a group of British ships, including the battleships Warspite and Ramillies, the task force encountered bad weather and had to reverse course on June 4. Later that evening, off Lundy Island, they redirected towards the invasion fleet gathering at Area Z. The fleet then headed south to Normandy, successfully navigating through German minefields cleared by minesweepers. Remarkably, no vessels designated for Omaha Beach were lost. D-Day. At 3 a.m. on June 6, 1944, USS Texas and the British cruiser Glasgow entered the Omaha Western Fire Support Lane, reaching their initial firing positions 12,000 yards offshore near Point du Hoc by 4:41 a.m. They were part of a combined U.S.-British flotilla of 702 ships, including 7 battleships and 5 heavy cruisers. The initial bombardment began at 5:50 a.m., targeting 6 15-centimeter guns atop Point du Hoc. Texas fired 255 14-inch shells in 34 minutes, averaging 7.5 shells per minute, marking her longest sustained firing period during World War II. While the main guns bombarded Point du Hoc, Texas's 5-inch guns targeted the area leading to Exit D1, a crucial route inland from western Omaha. At 6:26 a.m., Texas shifted her main battery to the western edge of Omaha Beach, around Villa. Her secondary battery targeted a ravine fortified with strong points defending an exit road. Using airborne spotters, Texas directed her fire inland to disrupt enemy reinforcements and destroy other strong points. By noon, the situation at Omaha Beach was critical. Strong German resistance and the lack of Allied armor and artillery threatened the assault. To support the struggling infantry, some destroyers moved dangerously close to shore, almost grounding themselves to fire on German positions. Texas also moved closer to shore. At 12:23 p.m., she was only 3,000 yards from the water's edge, firing her main guns with minimal elevation to clear the western exit D1 near Villa. She targeted snipers and machine gun nests hidden just off the beach and later attacked an enemy anti-aircraft battery west of Villa. On June 7, Texas learned that the Ranger Battalion at Point du Hoc was isolated, with low ammunition and increasing casualties. In response, she filled 2 LCVPs with provisions and ammunition for the Rangers. The returning LCVPs brought back 35 wounded Rangers, one of whom died on the operating table, a deceased Coast Guardsman, and 27 prisoners, 20 Germans, 4 Italians, and 3 French. These prisoners were fed, segregated, and not formally interrogated aboard Texas before being transferred to an LST for transport to England. Later that day, Texas shelled the enemy-held towns of Formigny and Treviers to disrupt German troop concentrations. That evening, she targeted a German mortar battery shelling the beach. Just after midnight, German planes attacked the offshore ships, with one plane swooping low on Texas's starboard quarter. Her anti-aircraft batteries responded but did not hit the intruder. On the morning of June 8, Texas's guns fired on Isigny, then a shore battery, and finally Treviers again. After rearming in Plymouth, Texas returned to the French coast on June 11, supporting the advancing army until June 15. By then, the troops had moved to the edge of Texas's gun range. Her last fire support mission was so far inland that her starboard torpedo blister was flooded to provide a 2-degree list, giving her guns the necessary elevation. With combat operations beyond her range by June 16, Texas departed Normandy for England on June 18. Battle of Cherbourg. On the morning of June 25, 1944, USS Texas, along with Arkansas, Nevada, 4 cruisers, and 11 destroyers, advanced toward Cherbourg to suppress the fortifications and batteries surrounding the vital port. Meanwhile, the U.S. Army's 7th Corps attacked the city from the rear. As the ships neared Cherbourg, the bombardment plan was altered, and Task Group 129.2, which included Arkansas and Texas, was directed to move 6 miles east of Cherbourg to engage Battery Hamburg, a large shore battery with 4 24-centimeter, 9-inch, guns. At 12:08, Arkansas was the first to open fire on the German positions. The German gunners waited until Arkansas and Texas were well within range before returning fire. By 12:33, Texas was straddled by 3 German shells. 5 minutes later, she began returning fire with continuous 2-gun salvos. Despite the geysers of water from near misses and the difficulty of spotting targets due to smoke, Texas pressed on. At 13:16, a 24 centimeters German shell struck Texas, skidding across the top of her conning tower, shearing off the fire control periscope, and exploding in the navigation bridge. The explosion caused severe damage, blowing the pilot house deck upwards by about 4 feet, wrecking the interior, and wounding 7 crew members. Tragically, the helmsman on duty, Christensen, later succumbed to his injuries. Despite this, Texas's commanding officer, Captain Baker, escaped unharmed and quickly cleared the bridge. Undeterred, Texas continued to fire her 14-inch shells in 2 gun salvos. At 13:35, she scored a direct hit on one of the heavily reinforced gun emplacements, destroying the gun inside. Throughout the 3-hour duel, Texas was straddled and nearly hit over 65 times by German fire. At 14:47, an unexploded 24 centimeter shell was reported. This shell had crashed through the port bow below the wardroom, entering the stateroom of Warrant Officer M.A. Clark but did not explode. The shell was later safely disarmed by a Navy bomb disposal officer in Portsmouth and is now displayed aboard the ship. Despite the relentless German attacks, Texas fired a total of 206 14-inch shells at Battery Hamburg until she was ordered to retire at 15:01. Operation Dragoon. Following repairs in Plymouth from damage sustained during the Battle of Cherbourg, USS Texas prepared for the invasion of southern France. On July 16, she departed Belfast Lock, heading towards the Mediterranean. The journey included stops at Gibraltar and Oran, Algeria, before arriving in Taranto, Italy, on July 27. Departing from Taranto on August 11, Texas rendezvoused with 3 French destroyers off Bizerte, Tunisia, and set a course for the French Riviera. She arrived off Saint-Tropez on the night of August 14 and was joined early the next morning by Battleship Nevada and cruiser Philadelphia. At 4:44 a.m. on August 15, Texas moved into position for the pre-landing bombardment, and at 6:51 a.m., she opened fire on her first target, a battery of 5 15 cm guns. The beaches were heavily fortified, and strong resistance was anticipated. However, due to poor visibility that morning, Texas relied heavily on her SG radar equipment for navigation and targeting, as no landmarks were visible during the bombardment. Contrary to expectations, the anticipated heavy opposition did not materialize, allowing the landing forces to move inland rapidly. With her fire support no longer needed, Texas departed the southern coast of France on the early morning of August 17. After a stop at Palermo, Sicily, she exited the Mediterranean and returned to New York, arriving on September 14, 1944. Operations Detachment and Iceberg. At New York, USS Texas underwent a significant 36-day repair period, during which all 10 of her 14-inch main gun barrels were replaced for the third and final time in her career. Remarkably, she was reunited with 9 out of the 10 original gun barrels that served on her from 1914 to 1923. These barrels had been used by the USS Pennsylvania before being refurbished and reinstalled on Texas in late 1944. These original guns have remained on Texas ever since. After a brief refresher cruise, Texas departed from Maine in November, heading towards the Pacific via the Panama Canal. She made a stop at Long Beach, California, before continuing to Oahu. Spending Christmas at Pearl Harbor, she then conducted maneuvers in the Hawaiian Islands for about a month. At the end of this period, she steamed to Ulithi Atoll. Departing Ulithi on February 10, 1945, Texas stopped in the Mariana Islands for 2 days of invasion rehearsals before setting course for Iwo Jima. She arrived off Iwo Jima on February 16, 3 days before the amphibious landings began, and spent the next 3 days bombarding Japanese defenses to prepare for the landing of 3 Marine Corps divisions. After the Marines stormed the beaches on February 19, Texas provided continuous naval gunfire support, responding to requests from Marine units through February 21. Though Iwo Jima was not officially declared captured until March 16, Texas departed the Volcano Islands on March 7, returning to Ulithi Atoll to prepare for the invasion of Okinawa, known as Operation Iceberg. She left Ulithi with Task Force 54, the gunfire support unit, on March 21, and arrived in the Ryukyu Islands on March 26. Texas moved close to Okinawa and began her pre-landing bombardment that same day. For the next 6 days, she fired multiple salvos from her main guns to clear the way for Army and Marine divisions set to make their amphibious landings on April 1. Each evening, Texas retired from her bombardment position but returned the next morning to continue. The enemy ashore, preparing for a defense in-depth strategy similar to Iwo Jima, did not respond directly, but several kamikaze raids targeted the bombardment group. Texas escaped damage from these attacks. On April 1, after 6 days of intense bombardment, ground troops went ashore. For almost 2 months, Texas remained in Okinawan waters, providing crucial gunfire support and fending off enemy aerial assaults. She claimed 1 kamikaze kill and 3 assists during this period. Texas was at general quarters for over 50 consecutive days at Okinawa due to the persistent kamikaze threat. The crew stayed at their battle stations continuously, subsisting on crackers and K-rations, and only had time for a quick shower and change of clothes every 3 days. Texas was never damaged, and it is believed she was the only U.S. ship to stay at general quarters for such an extended period during World War II. During the Okinawa campaign, she fired 2,019 14-inch shells, 2,643 5-inch shells, 493-inch shells, 3,100 rounds of 40mm ammunition, and 2,205 rounds of 20mm ammunition. On May 14, Texas departed Okinawa for the Philippines. End of the war. On May 17, USS Texas arrived at Leyte in the Philippines, where she remained until after Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. Following this, she returned to Okinawa towards the end of August and stayed in the Ryukyu Islands until September 23. On that day, Texas set a course for the United States, embarking homeward-bound troops as part of Operation Magic Carpet. She delivered her passengers to San Pedro, California, on October 15 and celebrated Navy Day there on October 27. Afterward, Texas continued her mission of bringing American troops home, making 2 round-trip voyages between California and Oahu in November and a third in late December. On January 21, 1946, she departed San Pedro and steamed via the Panama Canal to Norfolk, arriving on February 13. Soon after, Texas began preparations for an activation. On June 18, she was officially placed in reserve at Baltimore, Maryland. Museum ship. In 1947, the Texas legislature established the Battleship Texas Commission to oversee the care of USS Texas. The first task for the commission was raising $225,000 to tow the battleship from Baltimore to San Jacinto. On March 17, 1948, Texas began her journey to a new anchorage near the San Jacinto Monument at San Jacinto State Park, arriving on April 20. The following day, she was handed over to the state of Texas to serve as a permanent memorial. USS Texas was ceremoniously decommissioned on April 21, 1948, and her name was struck from the Naval Vessel Register on April 30, 1948. She became the first permanent battleship memorial museum in the United States. Unlike USS Oregon, which was displayed as a floating museum from 1925 to 1941 before being scrapped, Texas found a lasting home. Upon being presented to the state of Texas, she was commissioned as the flagship of the Texas Navy. Despite the best efforts of the Battleship Texas Commission, maintaining the ship proved challenging due to insufficient funding. Over the years, neglect led to cracks and gaps in coated surfaces, water intrusion, and steel deterioration. Interior paint began to crack and flake, exposing metal surfaces that started to rust. Additionally, pipes exposed to the sea eventually failed, causing flooding in various compartments. By 1968, the wooden main deck had deteriorated so badly that rainwater leaked through, pooling in the ship's interior. The commission found the cost of replacing the decayed deck timbers prohibitively expensive and opted to replace the wood with concrete. However, the concrete eventually cracked, and rainwater once again leaked through. In 1971, 3 local charitable institutions, the Brown Foundation, the Moody Foundation, and the Houston Endowment, contributed $50,000 to sandblast and paint the hull. By this time, newspaper articles highlighted Texas's plight, describing her as under attack from neglect and inadequate funding. Despite these challenges, Texas was designated a National Historic Mechanical Engineering Landmark by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers in 1975 and a National Historic Landmark by the National Park Service in 1976. USS Texas stands as a testament to American naval history, transitioning from a powerful battleship to a cherished museum ship. Despite facing challenges and deterioration over the years, the dedication to her preservation reflects the enduring respect for her service. As a National Historic Landmark, she continues to educate and inspire future generations, honoring the legacy of those who served aboard her during pivotal moments in history.